to the Ooze.
I'm on the cage, every foul wicked spirit in the host, the Ooze.
20 minutes, dead to Leve, on the Ooze, right now.
On the Ooze, it's gonna fucking rock. Be there. You kind of missed the whole point.
To really happen to have a serial occurring
Necessitates a certain fortitude.
Now, on to our show.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm TC Downey, a.k.a. Beast Zeno, and with me on the line is actually an incredible cast of characters. I've got Dark Fool, my co-host. Dark Fool, how you doing today, man?
I'm great, man. I got my coffee, and I'm ready to talk about what we're experiencing here on the Ooze and in reality.
Right on. Well, real quick, let's get the rest of the guests up on here. One of the guys that I really, really respect, and I've been watching his posts and stuff on Satanic International and 600 Club for quite some time now, has joined us for the first time. My friend Mindfux. Mindfux, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
Excellent, excellent. Then we got Jason King, Chicken Wings, in the house. So, JK, what's up, man?
Actually, you know what? I'm not really here. It's just, it looks like I'm here.
The figment of my imagination?
Yeah, we'll deal with that later, I'm sure. It's a hard problem, dude.
Right on.
We'll get to that.
Well, all right, where to begin this at? I mean, this whole thing for me kind of started when I was reading criticism that Mindfux had posted about the Temple of Set, and he, in the criticism, made the statement that it, when stripped away from all the bullshit Egyptology, which is, I guess, completely false from my understanding, the TOS fails to deal with the hard problem, and, well, the rest of its philosophy, I guess you can too, but that's neither here nor there. So I think Mindfux, you're the right guy to kind of start out, I guess, first describing what the hard problem is and why it's really a problem.
Sure, man, sure. Like, well, I mean, obviously, like, my disdain for the Temple of Set is pretty apparent from how I tend to approach their founder whenever I see him in any forum I've ever seen him in. I always have to kick him in the balls. But for me, the hard problem is always one that's formulated by David Chalmers, you know, and he sort of splits from, like, the easy problems in psychology to, like, the hard problems. And so the easy problems are shit like, how can we integrate information? How do we look at stuff? How do we focus attention? How do we report on mental states? How do we feel things? Like when we touch something, you know, how does the neurology of that work? You know? And it's one of those things where, like, the hard problem itself is so far out on the fringe that it's just been endless equivocation around what these terms actually mean and where they, you know, and so you've got, like, school after school of philosophical thinking that's made this much more complicated than it should be. Like, the hard problem is fucking easy. And Chalmers does it best. Like, he basically splits it into, like, some very simple questions. You know, shit like, why should physical processing give rise to, like, an inner life? Why do we have that experience of, like, an inner world? You know? Why is it that, like, some organisms possess this fundamental feature and others don't? Why does, like, this awareness of sensory information, like, why does when we feel something, we're aware that we felt something? Why does that exist? You know, and then if you believe that qualia exist, like, why do they exist? You know, and also, I mean, like, Chalmers is, like, one of the, like, his favorite little rants, you know, that I've ever read was about philosophical zombies, which is, why aren't we philosophical zombies? Like, why aren't we just automatons, you know, that we can logically reason, you know, that, like, sort of react autonomously to experience? I mean, who's the fucking pilot? That's really what it comes down to. Like, who's driving the car?
Right on. And do you actually have a theory on this, or are you kind of neutral?
Well, really quickly, if I may interject, these, if you could answer this question too, is how would you define qualia?
That old chestnut. Well, I mean, like, I tend to look at, like, the most simple definition that I can possibly read for what these things are. You know what I mean? Like I always look for like the one that's going to cause me the least of a headache later. You know, and basically, I mean, I always like to go back to the old example of like, you know, sort of like a concept like redness or taste. You know, like not just like the sense of taste, but like the experience of tasting something. So for me, a qualia is like a combination of like a physical characteristic of an object combined with our experience thereof. And I'm not convinced that they're necessarily distinct, like phenomena. I'm not necessarily convinced that qualia actually exist. I'm kind of with Dennett a little bit on that one.
And Beast, I know you asked a question really quick. I accidentally, cut in, but if you could restate it again.
Yeah, my question for him was what his, if he had a theory as to how to solve the hard problem.
Look, to be honest, it's one of those ones where, I'm fortunate enough that a friend of mine is doing his PhD in cognitive neuroscience at Bath University right now. And one of the things he was studying, and is studying extensively, is artificial intelligence and the means by which of creating artificial intelligence. And this sense of awareness and consciousness is obviously key. So I've got like quite a good mood whenever I fucking throw some complete shit out there. He'll tell me it's complete shit. And he basically, I sort of I think I was discussing something like, Penrose's theory of quantum mind with him. And he was like, look, it's a satisfying theory. He goes, you've basically got to understand with cognitive neuroscience, like the hard problem may not ever be answerable. I mean, and he's saying, even if you assume something like, orchestrated objective reduction or some sort of mysticism or pixie dust in neurons or like a combination of sensory phenomena, his point is, it's a never-moving goalpost, and I think when you consider stuff like Chalmers talking about access awareness, like access consciousness, which means that, like, you can explain memory without answering the hard problem. You can explain thought without answering the hard problem. You can explain feeling without answering the hard problem. And then when you ultimately end up in a situation where you can explain away basically every aspect that makes us, all of our experiences can be sort of explained and quantified, you're still left with the overriding question. And it's not necessarily the hard problem, it's basically the impossible problem. And it's, who the fuck is the pilot? I don't have a theory that for me yet adequately explains that, but then if I did, I'd have written a goddamn book and hoped I was right. It's not... I don't have a thesis for it. I'm aware of the vacuity with which others attempt to answer it, and it pisses me off. And I think as Satanists, the key is, you hear stuff like the Temple of Set doctrine, and you hear, quantum mechanics is basically, fucked the world of, amateur philosophy as far as I'm concerned. And you hear these, shady explanations of quantum magic taking place, that are poorly understood by the proponents thereof. And you end up with a situation whereby everyone and anyone basically has some kind of theorem that they believe is couched in rationale and science, and to be adversarial and to be the true skeptic and to make sure your ideas are reasoned, you need, I think the importance of the problem to Satan is to make sure you're armed sufficiently. You're not taken in by some bullshit.
Right on. All right, real quick, I'm going to kind of step over and I want to hit Jason King up here. Jason, do you agree with his definitions?
Oh, yeah, he's hit it right on the head. Matter of fact, he's mentioned about, at least that I can tell, he's mentioned a good 4 or 5 philosophers that have talked about this. And as a matter of fact, when he's saying, redness, he was actually talking about Frank Jackson and a seminal paper that he wrote, What Mary Didn't Know. These are things that everybody knows. I actually tend to agree with him on the ultimate thing that he was saying, or at least maybe the penultimate thing he was saying, in that I don't believe this is a solvable problem. I do not, because I believe that it is probably, and this is where my whole, weirdness comes in with the Jason King Advaita weirdness, is that I think that this is the foundational thing of our existence. And that it's irreducible. In other words, it's not something that can be reduced to anything else. It is, in essence, a quantum, a true quantum. Just like there are physical quanta, and those physical quanta actually, and this is something that could be testable. This is something that could be provable. The physical quanta would reduce to the mental quanta. But obviously, we're not at that level yet that we could do something like that, but. No, so whatever. whatever was said. I forget what the fuck was said. But yeah, no, I do agree with the definitions that were given.
Okay, and do you yourself have some proposal as to how to solve the hard problem?
I don't believe it's solvable at all. Just like Dude was saying, it's almost the impossible problem. It is the impossible problem because it is the fundamental nature of existence is to how the fuck to put this, to perceive or to exist as a substratum of awareness, to have a qualitative existence. That's not something that can be quantified. And that's really where the breakdown occurs, is between quantitative and qualitative measurement. That's why they're called qualia. Qualia are those things that are qualitative to experience, not quantitative. They're not like, we can't measure them. And I'm a big fan of mathematical analysis, no question about it. But there are certain things that don't break down into those categories, and the question is why. And for me, what it is that they are the mathematics itself. And that might sound kind of contradictory, but that's kind of the whole point of Advaita, is that it is somewhat contradictory in that the self that is perceiving, the self that is aware, the self that is... Well, and the self also is an ephemeral thing. It's not really a real thing. It's something that is kind of an illusion, if you will, that persists through all these things, only makes those other things applicable through what's the word I'm looking for here, an analogical or a relative expression. So those things come into being, both the self and the relative awareness, and they're both necessary and they're both irreducible. So if you were to try to reduce the other one too, meaning the phenomenal world, you would have the same difficulty. I just think that they're both given equally without any irreducibility. So I don't think there is... I do think there is a quote-unquote problem to be solved, but I don't think it can be solved, in other words, and I think that's kind of the mystery of life, and that's why we have fun with it, because then we can create myths about it, and we can tell stories and whatever. But at the end of the day, no, it will never be solved. I don't believe it will.
All right. Now,
at the same time, really quick, what I find very interesting about the hard problem is that it is, like reality itself, like redness, like how red is red, how much experience is this experience, etc., in trying to explain it. It's very interesting that the hard problem in and of itself can also be, not even there. Does the problem even exist?
Only insofar
well, that's a good question. I mean, people have been very adversarial in part, but only I think in a lot of the criticism, if you actually look at the critics of the hard problem, and you end up in a situation whereby people sort of fall back on the fact that it's uncomfortable, and so they feel that it can kind of. It can be explained away without ever actually addressing what the issue is. It's a qualitative issue. I mean, I think Jason King's very brilliantly on that. It's one of those things whereby even if you explain, Chalmers addressed his critics when he formulated his theory, and his critics have continued along the same line of, well, no, because it could just be it's a function of the brain, and it probably is a function of the brain. He doesn't disagree with that, but they miss the point that he's trying to make. Is he acknowledged their critique? He acknowledges some of the best critique of the hard problem, and issues with the hard problem. Even Dennett does it fantastically well. I mean, he's probably the best critic of it. Period. I mean, he just basically argues that qualia aren't objectively separable from access consciousness, as Chalmers calls it, and that's the seat of his fundamental attack. But Chalmers basically acknowledges that access consciousness exists. He acknowledges that access to memory can be explained. He acknowledges that thought itself can be explained, that reason can be explained. But he's missing the little human. I mean, no matter how he analyzes it mathematically or even neurologically. I mean, people forget that Chalmers is a mathematician, he's a philosopher, and he's a neuroscientist. scientist. He did his post-fellowship in neuroscience. This guy understands, like, the physical mechanics of the brain. He understands stuff like, you know, the gamma wave synchronicity, you know, on the 40 hertz range, where, you know, which basically is seen to be like the unifying frequency of consciousness in the human brain when it's looked at under an EEG. I mean, he gets all these physical parameters into his work also, and I mean, basically, like, I find Dennett's critique on qualia very, very convincing, but I don't think removing qualia from the occasion, from the issue or that experience, you know, combined experience necessarily solves a hard problem. Absolutely, because even if that were the case, even if qualia and those experiences are only a product of access consciousness and there's no other explanation required, it doesn't explain, and Dennett actually critiques himself. It doesn't actually explain how we can then reason about things outside of that system. You know what I mean? Like, we can reason on the issue of what we can and cannot experience, which shows an awareness of ourselves that we can't adequately explain. And as to whether or not that awareness is the quality or otherwise doesn't address it for me.
You know what's funny?
Self-awareness, which also points towards... Sure.
When Galileo was pressed with his critique of the motions of the heavenly bodies through the telescope that he had, you know, primitive telescope that he had devised, and the cardinals were questioning him, his end line was, "It moves nonetheless," I believe, something like that. And so I think that's kind of what it is. It moves nonetheless. No,
right.
That's kind of where I see qualia to be. It moves nonetheless, and there's something there that has not been explained, and that me personally, I don't believe can be explained, because I believe that it is a true quantum, and a quantum is, as a unit, cannot really be explained. It must be a foundation for explanation. It's not really something that is explained in terms of other things, but it is something that we use to explain other things, and that's where I'd probably go really counter to, you know, a lot of philosophers and probably Mindfux and everybody else, you know, in that I really do believe that conscious qualia are a quantum of explanation. So whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I can buy that to an extent, but, like, I mean, how would you answer Dennett? I mean, his basic critique of qualia, just to summarize and frickin' bastardize beyond recognition, is essentially that, like, if you were in a surgery or in, like, an operating room and you have operated on, and, like, they fucked your brain somehow, okay, so when you walked out, you saw that the sky was orange and, you know, the grass was red and, like, all your fucking qualia had been fucked. Like, you have no way of telling intuitively or via experience or via observation whether they've, like, damaged your optic nerve somehow and, like, legitimately fucked, like, your experience of a sense experience, or if they're fucked with your memories of what qualia were beforehand, and, you know, what your previous reference points were, and you have no way of telling. And so basically...
That's true, but it persists nonetheless. I mean, the subjective... Qualia are the subjective states of experience. They are the fact of... The very fact of the subjectivity of those experiences, meaning that they are had by an individual, meaning there is something that it is like to experience those things. QV Nagel's What It's Like to Be a Bat, you know, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So those are the irreducible things that I'm talking about.
Oh, boy, I mean, look, I mean, I can't dispute, you know, the fact of subjective experience, but I don't know. I mean, Dennett doesn't argue. I'm not arguing that, like, some sort of subjective experience of things occurs. But what Dennett was shooting for is a much finer distinction than that. What he's saying is that those subjective experiences of consciousness or subjective experiences of things or events aren't irreducible from the experience itself. In other words, like, by assigning, like, something to redness or to blueness or to a taste or to a touch or to something like that, you can't reduce that from other mental features, other features of the psyche, readily at all, or even in any way, to the point that you can't even tell if your qualia have changed or if your brain's fucked. You know, you can't tell if someone's messed with your past experience or current qualia. You have no way of making that determination. So what he's not saying is that there's no subjective experience. What he's saying is that qualia as a means for discussing that experience aren't valid. They aren't sufficiently descriptive, or they just don't really work at all. And it's just like a layer of equivocation that doesn't need to be there in his view. And I kind of fall into that box.
I can see that. I can see that being an objection, except insofar as the fact that what he's doing is he's mistaking, I guess, the general for the specific, or what have you, meaning that it doesn't matter so much what if my redness is your redness, or it doesn't matter if I'm colorblind. It sounds like almost I guess maybe a translation of the colorblind argument. I've heard that before too. You know what I mean? More primitive philosophers argue that it doesn't really matter. What matters is that there is a subjectivity at all. That is the hard problem. The hard problem is that there is a subjectivity at all. Not that the subjectivity is this, that, or the other thing, but that there is one irreducible feature of that cannot be explained in any kind of mechanistic terms. There is a non-physical element in the world, and see, this is a problem for us. It's a problem for the physicalists and the reductionists. You know what I mean? So that's who's arguing against it. So.
I mean, and without question, and like, I mean, just to touch on, I mean, the subjective experience and the nature of that. I think while you're a tool to maybe discuss aspects of it as a thought experiment, it works. But I think the problem exists nonetheless, and so I agree with you on that point. And I also, I just want to touch on something where you say that you regard, like, how there are with regards to physical quanta set against intellectual quanta. And, you believe that consciousness to an extent is, an intellectual quanta. It's a unit of thinking. It's the fundamental building block. It's the fundamental basis. I mean, that kind of, links neatly to, something I was reading just for my own delectation a while back, which was Penrose and Hameroff's Orchestrated Objective Reduction Theory of Consciousness and Theory of Mind, which is a neat attempt by Penrose, who's obviously heavily discredited from just a philosophical standpoint, but it's a neat attempt.
Yeah, actually,
to
I've had some difficulty with Penrose myself, but despite his other accomplishments,
his critique, he gets completely slayed. His misunderstanding of the second incompleteness theorem, and where he's attempting to go with that about non-computational features of the human thought process and things like that, it's just unconvincing, from a pure logics point of view. But I mean, his theory is an interesting thought experiment, because here's a guy who's gone balls to the wall with the help of Hameroff. He's actually an anesthesiologist rather than a philosopher, which is kind of hilarious. He's gone balls to the wall with this guy to try and explain the hard problem, or at least come up with some semblance of an answer. And he obviously the first thing he looked at, really, I think, was the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. And obviously, it's basically it's a situation whereby, objects seemingly, as quantum events, quantum spheres of probability, reduce to a moment, a quanta, only upon observation. And that's the Copenhagen interpretation of it. So I mean, it's kind of if I roll 6 dice under a cup and slam it on the table, there's an interpretation of quantum mechanics, which means that because I can't see the dice under that cup, that then I don't know numbers are showing whilst they're under that cup until I lift the cup and look at them. And of course that means each one of those dice has a 1 in 6 probability of being any of the numbers. And so I can treat that as that just through my own ignorance. Then when I lift the cup, I can look at it. Whereas what the Copenhagen interpretation says, obviously not literally with dice, but I mean with quantum-sized objects, like subatomic particles, etc., that when I roll those dice and I put them under that cup, those dice are literally showing every single number simultaneously in a superposition until such time that my observation of them collapses that superposition into an event, a measurable moment. And you see, I mean, that's a really, really gross oversimplification. But I mean, it really all comes down.
Oh,
to
I get it. I mean, even Schrodinger's experiment pretty much puts that, makes it a macroscopic example.
Yes.
Whereas you were just giving it as a microscopic example,
but we've also mirrored it macroscopically. I mean, they've actually created a measurable superposition in a macro scale object, i.e., it's an oscillating metallic kind of filament that they basically, rather than measuring that filament directly, what they did was they used a basic quantum computing measurement device that was attached to it. Then they measured the output of that measuring device rather than actually directly measuring the object. And what they found was a signature of a quantum superposition in a macro scale object. So the sick thing about it is we actually know that these kind of quantum superpositions objectively occur. Like, this isn't like caused by our ignorance. We've disproven my first.
Tell me something I didn't already know. I mean, that's kind of funny because that's what I'm trying to say is that, the quanta of consciousness is the quanta of physicality. There is no difference. There is no separateness. That's what Advaita is all about. That's where my ultimate approach comes from. But
I'm with that one. I'm with that one as well.
You kind of look at it. To go back to Penrose quickly, just to sort of finish the thought, is because he looked at the Copenhagen interpretation, which is just basically states that any old observation isn't enough. A conscious observation is required for these quantum superpositions to reduce, like collapse to like an event, a moment. He then sort of flipped it on his head and he said, well, what if an objective reduction, what if one of these things just collapsing on its own would result in a moment of awareness? And he combined that with Hameroff's work on microtubules into like single cell organisms, because basically what Hameroff was wrestling with is like, why is it a single cell organism if you only put food in one area of a Petri dish? And you put that single cell organism in there, obviously eventually it will hunt around and it will find the food. If you then move that organism to a new Petri dish, the first area it will look in will be the area that had food in the previous Petri dish. In other words, it seems to have some rudimentary memory, but it has none of the equipment, either biologically or intellectually or in any way, to actually have that memory. There's nothing there that we would conventionally understand as being a neuron or or like any kind of process that we could identify as being one that was, could create that kind of consciousness, that kind of memory. And so you combine the two and you start looking at microtubules in the human brain and basically conducted this theory that what you have in the human brain is a huge number of electrons within the neural net in the microtubules there, all of which are in a large superposition. They're all entangled with one another due to their close proximity. And they're all in superposition with one another. And the brain protects them such that they actually objectively reduce. Now, they don't reduce because of observation. They're just held in a certain stasis such that they actually reduce objectively on their own and create a coherent, overreaching moment of awareness throughout the whole brain as the whole superposition collapses. And that collapse occurs at the rate of 40 hertz, according to his math, which matches, the gamma wave synchronicity, which I was talking about earlier, which is the 40 hertz kind of, flash. And so consciousness technically flickers at 40 hertz, according to him. I mean, I like this theory, but my point of it is, he's gone balls to the wall. It's satisfying. It's convincing. And it's seemingly it's like, wow, that's cool. But what does it actually fucking tell us about the hard problem? Absolutely nothing. He's basically said there is fucking pixie dust, quantum pixie dust in our brain that causes us to fucking experience. But what difference does that make? What has that actually resolved for us? Is that any better than saying neurons interact and cause consciousness? Well, no. He's just moved the goalpost to a slightly smaller scale. And so, it's on this basis that I think we genuinely are looking at something where even if he's right, and I don't think he is, but even if he were right and everything he said was correct, we still don't have a fucking answer. We've just got an explanation of it's basically it's got no real explicative power.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there is an answer per se. I think the answer is that the question itself is the answer, and our minds being constituted the way they are, we want answers to questions, and sometimes the question persists regardless of how we try to answer it, and the question itself is what tells us something, and for me that's what the hard problem is to me, or the problem of consciousness, if you will. So I don't believe there ever will be an answer to it. I believe that is the most fundamental thing of reality, and it is entwined in the hard problem of physicality, which you could phrase that also. And I think those two are the same thing, and that's where I get weird, but whatever.
Which hard problem of physicality? Why is there something other than nothing? Or why are things physically real at all? Or is there a physical reality? What's your hard problem for physicality?
Oh, well, you could take why is there any of those? Why is there something rather than nothing? That's a good one.
Yeah, but
gentlemen, if I could interject again and bring up another concept that was brought up in this argument, the concept of zombies. And basically, I just want to open up that forum, starting with Mindfux. What do you think of that as far as Palmer's argument?
Well, I mean, look, Chalmers basically kind of like proposes several types of philosophical zombies, and I'm going to use the most basic because this is already too subliminal. But basically, it's like we can logically imagine, and Chalmers is very careful to always separate, what we can logically induce or deduce, and what is naturally possible. So he's not suggesting for a second that such a being can actually exist, but he does use it as a thought experiment. And what he's saying is that you can actually envisage, just using access consciousness, just looking at access, just like looking at something that has access to memory, that will react autonomously to stimuli, but doesn't actually experience anything, but could still behave exactly like someone who did have qualia, who did have an experience.
Right, and he kind of compared it to a computer as well.
Yes, exactly. Well, that was kind of where, that's a lot of his stuff, because that's where a lot of extreme experimental philosophy and experimental psychology and neuroscience is going. It's always linked to the concept of artificial intelligence, basically. And I mean, the fundamental problem was, if we built an artificially intelligent machine, how would we know we'd done it? And one of the answers posited was, and if I put my artificially intelligent computer in a fucking box, I put a human brain in a box, and I asked the box questions, and I didn't know which answer came from the computer, which answer came from the human brain, and upon studying those answers, I couldn't determine that. Then I have to assume that the computer is as sentient as the human brain, and I have to assume that awareness is there. And his point is that whilst naturally there is no such thing as a human zombie, I mean, you could create a zombie like that as a computer, and it would be indistinguishable from something that genuinely had the experience of consciousness, and that genuinely experienced qualia, etc. And it's just a cute little thought experiment. I mean, but I don't think it really addresses us getting any closer to answering. I don't think Chalmers himself would necessarily believe that he actually answered it.
It is a part of the argument that was kind of left untouched. I wanted to touch on it really quickly.
Well, no, what I think the point of it is that as a thought experiment, how would you distinguish a world in which there were qualia from a world in which everything was the same? We could call it, W1 or W prime or what have you, in which everything was the same except there were no qualia, meaning that nothing had any kind of qualitative experience whatsoever. You could have a world just like our world, in which, we were doing this blog talk radio and all that kind of stuff and everything else that we do, but that we had no experience of that we were automatons. It's a thought experiment, meaning
right.
How do you? There is something extra. In other words, is what the argument is. The extra thing would be the qualia or the qualitative states of consciousness that we're talking about. That's really where the automaton or zombie argument comes in, I think, as a thought experiment. Is that it's basically saying that how do you distinguish world W from world W prime? World W being ours and world W prime being the world in which... What? Go ahead.
Well, obviously there's no way of objectively doing so. It's kind of consciousness exists because subjectively it's kind of there. And, from an objective outside, in a world populated by philosophical zombies of various kinds, we would struggle. I mean, we're looking at basically... a behavioral zombie, that has behavior indistinguishable from a human, but doesn't experience anything, And,
well, there are people out there that actually argue that. I mean, really, they argue that, really. I mean, they're actually called behaviorists. It's just funny because you said behavior, but they're called behaviorists.
Well, well, for me, I mean, it's kind of I think for me, that kind of thinking, for me, it's just it's too Humean for my liking. I mean, Hume is hilarious, and I like his thesis, even though it's kind of, it's the product of his time, but it is quite an amusing, critique of I think, therefore I am. And he says, well, really, that's not true. All you can be really sure of is that thoughts exist, and an overriding sense of coherence, sense of self exists. You can't actually be confident that, just because you think you exist, you can only be confident that thoughts exist, and those thoughts amalgamate to a sense of self.
It's funny. Who did that recently? Somebody did that. Well, not recently, but within the past century, as a rejoinder, I think, to the qualia argument. There was some philosopher that did that. That rejoined that way.
Yeah, I'm only familiar with Hume's usage of that. I'm sure it's come up since. This is shit. There's plenty of bitching amongst philosophers about this one. But I'm not sure how convinced I am by Hume's argument really. For me, it's still like who experience. He does, but he doesn't address for me the issue of what is that experience of thought then? It's more than a sense of continuity of self. It's more than a sense that I exist. It's actually a qualitative experience of my own thoughts. It's that subjective.
Actually, it was P.F. Strawson. I'm sorry. It was P.F. Strawson.
Was it Strawson? And yeah. So in what context is he throwing this out?
I'm not entirely sure, but I just looked it up. In the brief ability of time that I have to look things up. I could look it up in more detail. Should I look it up in more detail? You're telling me I should look it up in more detail, aren't you? Let me give you the paper. Hold on. I'll give you the paper, goddammit. You're fucking with me, man.
It's my own...
Self, Mind, and Body. That's the name of the article. Yeah, there we go.
While Jason's taking a look at that real quick, I just wanted to make a little bit of commentary, I guess, and I don't know, actually ask you, Mindfux, what you think of the idea of it being that qualitative experience is actually a separate, material that we haven't discovered yet.
You're basically asking me if I'm a dualist. Or if I subscribe to dualism rather than monism, and for me, I can understand I can understand how sort of dualism kind of arose. I can understand the influence of people like Hegel. I can understand Descartes' point of view because they're products of their time. These are times at which the existence of a god or a spiritual realm or a non-material world they were just taken for granted as being accurate, and philosophy was built to explain those preconceived notions that that's how the world in fact functioned. And so, yeah, I'm unconvinced that there's some kind of separate immaterial existence which is consciousness, or that is, immaterial sort of sensations, or is qualia. I'm much more akin to sort of lean towards. I believe that there's aspects of the physical universe that we can't necessarily explain that may or may not lie at a quantum level, but are still absolutely rooted to the physicality of the world. I mean, the perceived physicality of the world, so to speak.
Let me ask you this question, Mindfux. Have you read John Searle at all?
Well, I mean,
he has the Rediscovery of the Mind, and he's done some other papers. But the Rediscovery of the Mind would be something that he's published in, popular media. John Searle. I haven't
read that one.
Yeah, because he's kind of going along those same lines, where he's rejecting, of course, substance dualism, and then, of course, property dualism, which is a little more difficult to reject property dualism. But he's going the whole 9 yards, and then he's offering, his own understandings of what exactly emergentism with regard to the mind really is. And it's really interesting, I think.
Well, by all means, I'm not overly familiar with his work. Obviously, his name rings a bell. I'm vaguely familiar with rationality and action. But
he's very big in intentionality. I mean, that's his big thing. I think he wrote a book on intentionality. I think it was just called Intentionality, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not sure.
And so, I don't know, do you want to summarize his thinking?
No, I'm not asking you to summarize his thinking. I'm just saying that might be something to look at because, I read that same kind of vector. You know what I mean?
Well, look, I just kind of, just from my limited knowledge of Searle, I know that like he enjoys like the false kind of dichotomy, as he I think called it, or just from vague memory. You know, kind of dualism versus modalism, and just like the fact that it's kind of like you can transgress both, you can sort of transcend both through reason, to the point that, you know, neither of us really require. I kind of subscribe to the theory. I don't believe that either would exist, but for like the fact that early philosophy was kind of brought about in a very mythic culture, and for like sort of philosophers typically have like an undue kind of respect, not for like the means of analytical thinking of like the founders of philosophy, because obviously that means of thinking and those like foundations of formal logic are still absolutely critical, but they have like an undue respect for like the actual theories these guys espouse that are just from a product of a time which we don't live in. You know, like, you know, as an atheist, how do I look at you know, like dualism, and how can I possibly regard that as being, how can I take that seriously, even within, like, even though I can accept the fact that like the universe itself isn't necessarily material, quote unquote, as we would so call it. That doesn't mean that I accept that there's like something on top of that that's inherently like mystical or inhabiting my brain, you know, and providing, you know, putting pixie dust in there.
Well, you know what the funny thing is, though, is that if you probe either what we might call the qualitative or subjective or what have you world, or the objective material world, you're going to find the same thing, and both of those are going to be somewhat disturbing. This is where I really liked your critique of Aquino, and where I was kind of hitting them on the same lines, is because they are Cartesian dualists, and that's really kind of been discredited. And I believe that that's where your critique was, and that's also where mine was. I don't think he got it, but that's beside the point.
Well, it's hard to tell if he gets anything from his responses.
Speaking of
with smileys, I mean, we get smileys, don't we?
Exactly. We get like a page of smileys, and they're told to politely fuck off.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, Mindfux, when it comes to attacking, say, like the Temple of Set, or critiquing them and saying, well, they failed to answer the hard problem, but if the hard problem is something that can't be solved, then why attack an organization like that in the first place?
That's a good question, but that wasn't like my problem isn't the fact that they failed to answer it. My problem is that they failed to answer it the whole time.
But it's something that can't be answered.
No, but the whole point is they're claiming to answer it. They're claiming they have an answer when they in fact don't, basically. So in other words, what they're saying is we have an answer. The answer is that this mystical being Set lives through us as a spark of awareness. You know, and that leads to like these ridiculous conclusions of eternal life and all this shit. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you've just stuck a label on fucking consciousness, invented some mythological backstory that isn't backed by like any kind of Egyptian mythology whatsoever.
So your critique is that it's crystallizing. Your critique is that it's crystallizing something that cannot possibly be contained.
My critique is that he's trying. Yes, I mean that's kind of more poetically phrased than I'd put it. Personally, I'd say he's fucking spotted a question, and like all fucking cult leaders and all people who are basically attempting to rile the following, he proposed the lowest, simplest, common fucking answer with a poor rational justification. But yeah, so that's how I put it. I'm not a fan, basically.
Yeah, that was hard to understand right there, dude.
All right, guys.
I didn't get you, man. No, I'm just kidding.
Real quick, we've got a caller on the line. I'm going to go ahead and pop them on real quick.
Awesome.
Caller, you're on the Ooze.
Hello, how you guys doing? This is Paul Valentine from the WCSL.
Yeah, right.
WCSL.
Hey, dude, do me a favor. Go kill yourself.
I have a question. Well,
hey, kill yourself, pal.
The hard problem is why aren't you guys paying attention to me? Jason, I have a question for you.
Because you're nobody.
Or is he?
One question.
That's the hard problem.
Jason, one question for you. One question. Ready? Why haven't you killed yourself yet? Huh? I told you.
Who, me? Who are you talking to?
Yeah. I'm talking to you, Mr. King. This is Paul Valentine.
Hey, Zach. Hey, Zach. You do a pretty good Paul Valentine, but whatever. It ain't running over on me, dude. What's up, Satanic International Network? It's awesome to see you on the air, man. You should represent yourself instead of some ass clown, though, I would think. I would hope.
Kill yourself.
Yeah, kill yourself, motherfucker.
You know what? Jason, it's Dark Fool. I got a question for you, Dark Fool.
Shoot.
Dark Fool.
Yes.
Matt? Are you there?
Yes. Oh, he doc dropped me. Uh-oh, look out.
Yeah. You know what? What do you got? You got a silly hat. You know what I got? I got 7 million paid members. What do you got? A hat? Kill yourself.
7,000 paid members and still no job. Kill yourself, get a job, bitch. I'm just kidding.
All right.
I'm a satanic superstar. I play
horrible
music on my blog talk radio show.
When you're in your room and sucking your thumb, I'm sure you are a satanic superstar there, Mr. Val. So whatever, dude.
All right, guys, that was a nice derailment, but let me kind of bring us back. Let me ask you guys a question.
Thank you.
Do you think that perhaps the hard problem of consciousness is slightly miscategorized and it's really a problem dealing with emergence rather than the way that it's described?
Actually, personally, I think emergence would be secondary to that. I think that you could explain it in terms of some kind of emergence, but still the problem would remain, I think, even if you did have some kind of explanation along those lines. And I think we do already have something like that, like a physical emergentism with regard to mental states. At least that's where, pretty much everybody's going. I'm not going to say I'm going there, but I'm saying pretty much everybody's going there. So, but still the problem remains. The problem is why there is this thing that emerges. It's not necessarily that it emerges, but that, it is what emerges. In other words, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me. I'm just curious.
Even if you accept like a physical basis, and even accept it's like a consciousness is an emergent thing, it still doesn't explain what the fuck it is. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that was the problem with like sort of Penrose's theory. Is the bottom line is that even though he may have explained adequately how it functionally worked, he hasn't explained what the fuck it is. I'm kind of like I'm unsatisfied with the explicative power of that line of thought, that line of reasoning.
Right on. I have actually recently come across a gentleman who proposes that he solved the hard problem on YouTube. His YouTube channel is Jeff Canon's.
You solved it on YouTube. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna have to post the link, man, because I hear some good shit on YouTube these days. I hear that's where the real intellectuals bring out the big guns.
Oh, hell yeah. And pictures too.
No puns intended.
The thing, in my opinion, that makes his theory interesting is he chalks it up to pretty much being a how do I explain this? An electromagnetic byproduct of the neurons firing, and I mean, to some extent,
it doesn't explain the problem, though, and that's exactly what Mindfux was saying. You can give the physicalist definition of it all day long, and that's really what makes it the hard problem, not the soft, easy.
Not the easy problem, yeah. But see that again, this is going back to what
in the first place.
This is going back to the hard problem because there are a lot of assumptions being made in the argument itself.
Well, basically it comes. It's really simple. I mean, the bottom line is the hard problem is, this phrase by Chalmers effectively is who the fuck is the pilot, and I can explain physically how the pilot works.
That's what the hard problem is definitely pointing towards. That's what I like about it. Is it's not so much what it's saying; it's what it's implying.
Exactly, and the other thing is also, Chalmers acknowledges shit like the potential for the brain to produce consciousness. But he says that explains access consciousness. The physicality of the brain, as far as he's concerned, it explains all of consciousness. That's not his point. But I mean, the parts of it that you can physically explain easily that don't require the hard problem, don't explain the full experience of consciousness. So memory on its own, how we experience memory, could be a case of access consciousness, but the total experience of remembering isn't something that can be addressed just with the method. We can explain the method of that shit all day, and we'll never actually crack what it is. And so Chalmers kind of like imposing the question. He sort of said, look, I mean, he's not saying it transcends physical explanation, but what he's saying is that, like, to date, you could explain all of the things that we can physically explain, and you still aren't be able to answer easily what the fuck consciousness is. You can only ever explain the features of it, but never actually the thing itself.
It's actually a good example, modern example of this. Now I think about it is Jeopardy these days, and how they've hooked up a supercomputer versus regular humans.
Have they actually done that?
It's on TV.
I don't watch Jeopardy. They have actually hooked up and the supercomputer ever loses. I mean, it has to have.
It does. Because, I've had this argument with somebody before. It's like some guy said, what do you think is more intelligent, a computer or a human? Because computers have, become so advanced. I said, yeah, but they're only as smart as the people programming them. And that's the big difference right there within consciousness, that as organic beings,
well, that's sort of true, but it's not really true. I mean, look at Deep Blue and how Deep Blue can play chess with Kasparov. Kasparov didn't program Deep Blue, but Deep Blue can play chess with Kasparov and beat him. The best grandmaster on the planet, and who programmed him? Probably some dudes that really can't play chess, but
understood algorithms. And understood.
Well, in that case, I'd say, how could you not program a computer not to win Jeopardy? I mean, Jeopardy ain't chess. I mean, it's just fucking like hook something up to the internet and have it be able to do a goddamn Google search, and you can win Jeopardy every fucking day of the week.
But let's compare Deep Blue to like Skynet. The concept of Skynet, for example.
Skynet, isn't that something out of like the Terminator movies or something?
It is.
Exactly. It became a self-aware computer.
Well, you know what the funny thing is, though, that I have a belief that we will generate a strong AI out of the internet. I believe it, and it's going to happen by accident. I don't believe it's going to be on purpose. I think it's just going to be one day, boom. It's like, wow. There's this thing out.
There's an interesting study conducted about how the internet ferries information around, and it does it in a chaotically self-organizing fashion. But it's more efficient than it should be based on the rules that fundamentally govern its protocol. In other words, it will make irrational-looking decisions to route certain packets of information through certain servers, despite the fact that it's counter the fundamental rule set that it's meant to function by. So we're already seeing, no one's arguing that it's self-aware, we're seeing evidence of like a ghost in the network. And, if you look at the network, the internet itself, it is a multi-node, chaotic, self-organizing system. And that's exactly what the brain is. And then you see emergent, you really start to see emergent behaviors from those kind of chaotic self-organizing systems. Like, you see it in fucking hive events. You see shit that's just absurd, like they fucking farm like caterpillars and shit to eat their shit. They actually have farms and that hills, and that's emergent from very simple nodes doing very simple things. So yeah, I mean, I kind of buy the theory that perhaps the internet at some point could, become self-aware if it keeps getting bigger, and the nodes thereof become more integrated with it. And yeah, I mean, I don't see a reason why not. Of course, that's based on the fact that if I can say that basically formalism is ultimately right, and physical form and the physicality of something is what generates all of its characteristics.
But see, this brings up a very good illustration of the hard problem: is that who's more in control? Are we controlled by the technology that we've created, or is our creation now in control of us?
Well, I mean, define control. I mean, I don't want to get into some sort of transhumanistic rant. But
hey, watch the Matrix trilogy. Get back to me. No, I'm just kidding. What is control, man? Exactly, man. Really, the problem is not control. I mean, dude, if you put me in a cage with a tiger, I guarantee you that tiger's going to control the fuck out of me, dude. It has nothing to do with the fact that I can think better than it can. But just the fact that it has some bigger claws and he's hungry and I'm a target.
Well, yeah, it will get out of you physically, but I mean, if you put a fucking chessboard in the middle of that and make the objective of that encounter to win the chess game, the tiger will eat the shit out of you, but it won't win the fucking game of chess. Now, the odds, I mean, probably you'll have to forfeit.
No, it won the game of chess, the only game of chess that mattered. As far as I'm concerned, because I'm dead, dude. If I'm dead, what the fuck does the fucking chessboard matter? It doesn't matter, dude.
What I'm saying is, it's kind of like, yeah, it can control you in a certain way, you know, in like a certain condition. But then if you're in that cage with a fucking gun and can shoot the tiger in the head, you know, before it can even touch you, then you win. You control the situation, and you've done so using your intellectual reason. So I mean, you know, if you give it all its natural weapons against your natural weapons, all you're really proving is that we're pussies compared to tigers. You know, but then if you bring in your mental weapons with you in a physical form, like a gun or a fucking machete or like a fucking machine gun, you can win.
Well, all we have to look at is we have a big chessboard out there right now, which is the world of phenomena. And in that world, the tiger is an endangered species, sadly enough, and human beings are overpopulating the fucking planet. So, yeah, you made your point, but I thought the point was something else. I was just being jokeristic, like I normally do. I make up words. I do that from time to time, so.
No, that's acceptable.
All right, guys, we got about 3 minutes left in this show, and I got to tell you guys, this has been just absolutely stimulating. I'll probably be thinking about this shit well into next week. I honestly, myself, kind of don't believe that the problem exists in the way that it's expressed, but I certainly can see validity in, I guess, wanting to try to answer what it is. I mean, to me, it seems kind of, I don't know, retarded to try to explain why why a hair showed up on your back in a specific spot. You know?
Well, you keep saying the funny thing is you keep saying the word I. You keep saying the word I over and over again. I this, I do this, I say this, I whatever.
There is no spoon.
Well, yeah, there is no spoon. The question is there no I? Not I like the eye in the side of my head or what have you, but the I that perceives things.
Right. I honestly, and I know saying I honestly is self-referential and kind of defeats what I'm getting ready to say, but I purposely kind of put that in there because I think that consciousness in itself is not a singularity. It's a plural. Fuck, I can't say the word.
Plurality, yeah.
Plurality, yeah, that's it.
Something like that.
Right, so that's definitely getting cut out and put into the next intro.
No, dude, I was actually stuttering myself. You think I was making fun of you? I was actually stuttering myself. I haven't had my chicken wings yet today, so.
Right.
Actually, I got them in. It's sitting in the stove. I was kind of pissed off because I cooked everything and it was ready, but then it was like 1 o'clock, so I was like, fuck.
Right. Well,
I've just been scratching my ass, you know.
All being said and done, guys, thank you very much for giving a very stimulating show and a real hard look at why it's almost impossible to answer that question. So.
Yeah, the hard problem is really why, you know, after I fuck the bitch, why my dick won't get soft again for about 5 hours. I don't know why. It's the hard problem. I don't know why it won't get soft, but anyway.
Sure it's not
it
the
happens.
Soft question?
What?
or are you sure it's not like the small question?
Small? Hey, dude, did I ever show you my... Never mind. I probably did, didn't I?
For the record, there was none of that.
I know there was none of that, you fucker.
Right on. So, to solve your hard problem, Jason, quit taking that little blue pill, and we'll be good. To solve,
blue pill?
Yeah, the little blue pill. I forget what.
We're not talking about the Matrix. I think he's referring to Viagra.
Yeah, I'm referring to Viagra.
Dude, I got kids. I don't need the Viagra. You know that shit, man.
But that
just proves you didn't need it.
What? All right. Oh, yeah. Funny. All right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I used actually. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go the opposite angle. Yeah. That's what did it for me. Was the pill. I love it, man. Because it keeps my dick hard for like 24 hours straight for like 7 days a week or something like that. What the fuck? They say like if your dick's hard for this long a time, then you might have a medical problem. Contact your doctor. I never had to do that because I still went down right at about the right time. So it's all good.
Show's over, guys. We're off the air. Thank you very much.
All right, guys.
I love the too much information shit. I just love fucking with people. All right, man.
All right.
Again, thank you all. Yeah.
No worries. Catch you later, guys.
Talk to you later.
All right, bye.